in Nigeria takes center stage, explaining the role of ASM in energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria, with their objective to advocate and campaign for a full implementation of the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan and other global policies and treaties. Join Emeka Umesi and our seasoned resource persons on the role of artisanal and small-scale miners in energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria. Fridays, 9 to 10 a.m. only on JE 101.9 FM. Powered by Ziva Community Initiative Advocate for a Sustainable Community with support from Africa Center for Energy Policy.
$92 million Nigerians lack access to electricity, while 175 million lack access to clean cooking solutions. Good morning and welcome to Voices from the Mines, brought to you by Ziva Community Initiative. And you know, every Friday from 9 to 10 a.m. we're always here to educate and inform you about the role of artisanal and small-scale miners in Nigeria's energy transition plan. And today we'll be speaking with our special guest, like we always have every Tuesday, on Nigeria's energy transition plan. What does it mean? How does artisanal and small-scale miners get involved? What does the plan even mean for Nigeria's economy, for Nigerians as a whole, and for the environment this morning? And I've got with me this morning on the show Mr. Katlong Alex, is an energy and sustainability analyst, African Energy Council. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, thank you.
Good morning. It's good to have you here. Remember, you can be a part of the conversation by calling into the studio lines on 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-77777. By 9:30 or by 9:40 thereabout, the phone lines will be open so you can call in and ask your questions and also make your contributions. So let's start off with the elephant in the room, the big question when it comes to energy transition. I'm sure there are people out there who haven't heard of the word before, who are hearing for the first time, or maybe they've heard of it, but are not certain what it means. Let's start off with, what does energy transition mean? And secondly, what is the Nigeria's energy transition plan?
Okay, so the first thing is energy transition. What is the energy transition? So energy transition was launched in Nigeria's energy transition actually was launched by President Buhari in 2022 at COP26. And it's essentially just a commitment by Nigeria to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. So the plan essentially is a homegrown, multi-pronged approach to cutting down emissions in Nigeria, largely in the power sector, cooking sector, transport sector, and industry. So largely, the plan aims to cut down emissions in these main or these key sectors.
So let me I'm going to piggyback a little.
Okay.
So you said the plan,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, is to cut down emissions in these 5 sectors: power, cooking,
Yes.
transportation. And what are the other 2?
Okay, so power, cooking, oil and gas, transport, and industry. So these industries or these sectors rather collectively contribute about 65% of Nigeria's emissions.
Okay, so let's piggyback. When you say emissions, what exactly do you mean?
Greenhouse gases emissions. So things like carbon dioxide, methane, and all of those things that emissions that trap heat in the environment and exacerbate climate change, essentially.
Okay, so the emissions we are trying to reduce. So we are saying that we want to have a system where these greenhouse gases are emitted less.
Yes.
Now, you also made mention of something that I think is important. You talked about, President Buhari giving this plan in COP26, and you mentioned something about 2060. How are they connected?
Okay, so there's a global drive for the energy transition. It's a whole global thing, and I think the official timeline by the United Nations is actually by 2030 for every signatory to meet to cut down emissions by 2030 to meet the net zero target or the carbon neutrality target. Right?
So, okay, sorry. Again, I'm going to try to be bumped in the conversation. When you say meet net zero target, what exactly do you mean?
Okay, so to find a balance between emissions and between emissions, largely to just find the balance between emissions and then cutting down on those emissions. So take for example, if we emit say 50 tons of carbon emissions in any of these sectors, then we try to cut them down by either afforestation or using carbon capture storage technologies to kind of like make up or balance up the emissions that we make.
So let me try again. Let me help understand what you said. So basically what you're saying that the net zero means that as much as we are emitting carbon monoxide or carbon, all of these carbon emissions, we have enough system to absorb them such that they don't become detrimental to the world.
Exactly, yes. So it's finding the balance.
So in finding the balance, you talked about how Nigeria's emission numbers and those 5 sectors called contribute 65%. This transition plan, what exactly does it entail for Nigerians? What exactly does it entail for Nigeria?
Okay, so the energy transition plan largely is very important to Nigeria actually, because there's a huge global shift in the energy. There's a huge energy shift in the world or the global energy system. In the case that lots of countries are shifting away from fossil fuels, and Nigeria largely depends on oil and gas as their main source of income. I think oil and gas constitute about 90 to 80% of government income and spendings, right? So it's very important, very imperative, I must say, that we also get on the energy transition so that we are able to we're able to just meet up with the world, right? So there's a concern for stranded assets. So in a case where lots of people will give out our oil and gas to, given Nigeria is heavily reliant on oil and gas, so if they no longer have use or need for that oil and gas, then you see it becomes a problem. Yeah, so it's very important that we also transition accordingly. And I think important to note that we have what it takes to also transition as well. And so just to add more light, largely while Nigeria mostly had our own targets to 2060 as against 2030 is because again, as I mentioned, is a homegrown multi-pronged approach. So it's kind of like an internal audit of Nigeria's where we are and how we can feasibly meet that target. That is why ours is in
2060. I've got 2 questions for you. The first one is with regards to Nigeria's net zero target of 2060, and we are in 2025, so it means we have 35 years to meet that. You also mentioned that this plan was created in 2022 by Buhari and also chaired at the time by Vice President Ziva. From then till now, would you say we've made progress in getting to that level? And secondly, is 2060 feasible for us, not just in terms of net zero emissions, but also in terms of the effects it might have on the economy and poverty in Nigeria?
Okay, yeah. So as regards progress, I think it's worthy to say that there has been progress. I think the first initiative by the federal government I would want to highlight is the presidential initiative on CNG. So you see there's a lot of ramp up of using CNG, right? Presidential CNG initiatives, stuff like that. That has use of CNG to curb down emissions. And largely, just to note again, the energy transition plan states that Nigeria is planning to use natural gas, as a transition fuel. So that is to say that we are going to leverage on our existing large reserves of gas.
So we have enough. Do we have enough natural gas to take care of us as a people?
Yes.
And maybe export?
Absolutely. We have immense gas deposits in Nigeria. I think the figure around 206 million cubic foot of gas reserves, like that Nigeria can use. So gas typically burns cleaner and then it emits less in the environment. So Nigeria is essentially saying, okay, while we're reliant on oil and gas, we're going to adopt natural gas, right, which burns cleaner and then essentially emits less in the environment, right? So when you see things like the CNG
vehicles.
Yes, CNG vehicles, yes, the presidential CNG thing. And then it seriously cuts down on emission. And then also important to note that Nigeria's gas reserves as well can actually be used to leverage hydrogen as well, which is blue hydrogen actually in this case, so generating hydrogen through natural gas. So it's called blue hydrogen. So that can impact lots of industries. So it can impact the transport sector, aviation sectors, and largely hard to abate sectors in Nigeria.
Okay. So my other question was, from what we've done so far, and from the plan we have, is it feasible that by 2060 we'll have net zero in Nigeria. And the reason I ask this question is because over time, outside of Nigeria, we've had this conversation around net zero for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
We've had, like you mentioned, COP26, and before that, back in France, all of the plans, I won't say every time, but more often than not, we always seem to push it further. Okay, we've not gotten there yet because we've not done ABC. For Nigeria, with the plans we have and the way we are moving, is it feasible, or are these things just plans on paper that will most likely shift to a further date because we can't meet them?
Okay, so as regards the feasibility of meeting this 2060 target, I think it's safe to say we are making progress. I can't say definitively if whether at all we are going to meet the target, but you can see there's a lot.
Is the progress commendable, or is it forgettable?
Yeah, so I think it is commendable, right? It's commendable because you can see there's a lot of the PIA, Petroleum Industrial Act, has seen streamline lots of processes in the energy sector and has boosted lots of investor confidence. So you see lots of projects coming up around gas in Nigeria, trying to leverage gas as part of the energy transition.
All right, let's take a detour, not a detour really, just connect the dot here.
Yeah.
For artisanal and small scale miners, how exactly do they play in this energy transition plan?
Okay, yeah, so artisanal and small scale miners are very, very important, and it's a shame that they do not even know the role they can play in the energy transition. So just to set the scene, as I mentioned earlier, Nigeria is heavily reliant on oil and gas, right? And then most of those who take on this oil and gas are beginning to transition, are shifting away from the traditional oil and gas into renewables, hydrogen, geothermal, and all of those things. And a lot of the technology or a lot of the mineral resources that are needed for this transition relies on minerals, right? And Nigeria has an abundance of these minerals. So think cobalt, lithium, which are being used for lithium batteries, for things like aluminium, which are being used for solar, and a bunch of rare earth minerals essentially that is very crucial into the energy transition. So that's where the role of artisanal and small scale miners come in. So they are the ones, I think globally about 25% of the general global output of tin and tantalum are being mined or unearthed by artisanal and small scale miners. So they have a huge and an important role to play in this transition, because the minerals now are the driving force of the transition. So they have a very huge role to play. And sorry, just one more thing. So in the event where there's a huge shift from oil and gas, so there's definitely going to be need for these rare earth materials and mineral resources. So that's where the mining sector comes in. But funny enough, mining is not even a core pillar of the energy transition plan. So it's very important that we have to think our way around it and to see how mining can be integrated, because mining also contributes to climate emissions, lots of emissions.
That's what I was going to come to, because like you mentioned, we want to have a net zero world where carbon emissions also are dealt with the systems to absorb them. However, mining, let's use tin mining since one can into it, also contributes a great deal to this. Is there a solution already preferred or being worked on to ensure that while we are mining, we don't add more problems to the ones we are trying to solve? I heard a quote somewhere, but somebody said most solutions also lead to problems. So in the energy transition plan, not just for Nigeria but globally, how important is mining, or rather, what is the conversation around making sure that people who are mining, these small-scale miners, do not add more problems to the ones we are trying to solve?
Okay, so that's one of the main issues with artisanal miners. They are largely informal. So I think because they are largely informal, their contribution to GDP is not even necessarily captured in GDP calculation, right? So a lot of the things they do is largely informal. So they are usually underpriced. Most of the artisanal miners are very ignorant. They don't even know some of the minerals they are mining. They just do it, get paid, and then just keep it moving, right? So the rules, so the informal nature of artisanal and small-scale miners is a huge problem, and there's a huge need for them to be formalized, to streamline processes, to have policies that can come in and help the sector. So there are lots of like climate funds. There is a green climate fund. There's a lot of infrastructure climate resilient funds that are available. But because artisanal and small scale miners are not aware and are not well educated, so they don't even know how to tap from these resources. So in a way for artisanal and small scale miners to not add problems to the existing problems that we have, would have to do with even the mining sector and the artisanal small scale miners to incorporate or to use or adopt renewables as well in their operations, because they are largely crude. They usually use very local tools and diesel generators, so they also emit. So it's very important that renewables is also integrated into ASM. However, because of their informal nature and because of how expensive it is to incorporate renewables into artisanal small-scale miners, because again, these are not people that have the money for this kind of thing. So it's important for them to be fully incorporated, licensed, and then that way they can tap from these funds that are accessible to them, and they can be able to invest. And then there's also the rural electrification agencies, which can also play a huge role too, because largely most of these artisanal and small-scale miners operate in rural areas that are not even connected to the grid. So it's important that with formalization, they can get funding from the Rural Electrification Agency to provide solar mini-grids and hybrid stations essentially in these areas, so that at least it can help automate some of their processes and make some of their outputs clean as well.
All right, I've got one question before going on our first commercial break on the show. In regards to the financial, not burden, the financial strength or the financial requirements of transitioning from what we already have to to green energy. You mentioned earlier while we were talking how many of these small scale miners do not have the financial strength to get the machines that use renewable energy to power them. On the general sense of things, economically speaking, is the transition plan, is it economically viable in the sense that would it give us as a people economic strength and advantage? Because if you look at things like solar panels, most people that can use solar panels are not the average person. There are people who have some level of wealth. If you look at things like wind vanes, the people who can use wind vanes are not the average person. What the average person can use is what we already have, the one that is not exactly very clean, right? Is there a possibility that green energy can get cheaper, as I won't say as soon as tomorrow, but soon enough, that the average person in the rural areas can adopt it? Because as much as we might say that, well, they don't do a lot, their tiny activities also contribute to their emissions. How fast or how soon can green energy become cheap enough for the average person to afford?
Okay, so over the years, renewable energies essentially has seen a huge drop. So before now, little solar panels cost a lot of money, but you see with advancement in technology, you begin to see that the prices are coming down astronomically, right? So it becomes more accessible. I think before now, when you just move around town, you see lots of people with solar panels, and you don't necessarily have to be a wealthy person to have that. However, but the economic viability of the energy transition now coming back to Nigeria is Nigeria can be positioned, or Nigeria is uniquely positioned in a way that we have some of these rare earth metals that are needed for the transition. So local value addition in Nigeria can help us ramp up these minerals and participate in the energy transition fully. So instead of mining these things and sending them out, we can actually do the value addition in here, and then you can see localize it and then even become exporters for some of these things. And then coming back to the energy transition, so remember the energy transition is a phase, so we're trying to move away, right? So that's why when we say in the Nigeria's energy transition plan, and we're saying we're trying to use gas as a transition fuel, we are able to seriously cut down on emissions and also meet the needs of the people. So I think, again, coming back to the CNG buses, I think the metro bus in just to runs on CNG, I think that is why it's that affordable, right? People are able to pay 200 for trips. So there's that possibility that using gas as a transition fuel can help, can really cut down on cost, right? And then there's also hydrogen, as I mentioned. So with our gas reserve, huge gas reserves in Nigeria, we're able to harness natural gas for hydrogen, which burns clean. So that affects cooking as well. So LPG and then CNG essentially for vehicles. So the energy transition, solar and all of those kind of things largely can play a huge role in cutting down economic weights on Nigerians largely, yes, because we have lots of other. And then when we talk about green energy, we're not necessarily saying only about solar or wind pipe, right? So Nigeria also has huge potentials for geothermal as well. Although that's a conversation for a different day.
All right, let's go on the first commercial break. When we come back, we'll still speaking to Mr. Katlong Alex, talking about energy transition plan. What does it mean? What does it mean for you, for me? What does it mean for Nigeria? What does it mean? What does it mean about that for the artisanal and small-scale miners in the country? And how can everyday persons be a beneficiary to the transition plan? This is still Voices on the Minds.
Every Friday on JFM, energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria takes center stage, explaining the role of ASM in energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria, with their objective to advocate and campaign for a full implementation of the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan and other global policies and treaties. Join Emeka Umesi and our seasoned resource persons on the role of artisanal and small-scale miners in energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria. Fridays 9 to 10 a.m. only on JE 101.9 FM. Powered by Ziva Community Initiative Advocate for a Sustainable Community with support from Africa Center for Energy Policy.
Still on to Voices from the Minds, brought to you by Ziva Community Initiative. And today we're talking about the energy transition plan and how it fits into Nigeria's economic growth. Our guest today has been Mr. Katlong Alex, who been telling us what the energy transition plan means, or like they call it the ETP, and how it fits into us, exactly what the small-scale miners can do to be a part of the plan. Remember, you can be a part of the conversation by calling into the studio lines on 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-777-777. Call in and share your thoughts and ask your questions. So let's talk about finances before we go to the economic side of the conversation. $1.9 trillion is needed. First off, not too much. On a lighter note, 1.9 trillion. What exactly are we using 1.9 trillion dollars to do to transition from fossil fuel to clean energy?
Yeah, so it's a huge sum of money, and that's why it's something that would take time, right? So that is why I think it's important to know that it's while we're clamoring, or while the whole world is clamoring for energy transition, it's important that our dynamics for each country is different. So I think that's why Nigeria took the time to go back home, do lots of research around where we are as a country and the feasibility of that transition, right? So I think in the case of the finances needed for that transition, we have a huge opportunity, particularly in the mining sector, because largely, as I've mentioned, the transition largely hinges or depends on natural and rare earth minerals. So it's very important to say that we have to harness these potentials, right? Formalize ASM, include the mining sector into the energy transition plan, and that way we are able to position ourselves strategically in the energy transition. And that way we are able to mobilize funds, we are able to raise funds to support the energy transition. Also leveraging, remember, gas as a transition fuel, also leveraging on gas as well.
All right, so you made mention of leveraging on other things. Again, let me stick with the funding. Is it possible, or is there a part of the plan that involves funding from foreign borders? Because I remember there was trying to look for the term of the word, where countries who emit a lot of gases have to put come together in a pool of funds to give to other countries. Is there a part of this funding that's that needs this money? And as a country, what's the plan like to ensure that the money needed to transition fully by 2060 is achieved?
Okay, so I think just to put it out there, Africa as a whole contributes to just less than 4% of global emissions. So just to put it out there, so the big polluters are China, the US, yes, and all of that. So just important to put it out there. And I think more recently when we've seen the US pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, so you see that can be a huge challenge because lots of other countries as well willpower can just go down and be like, oh, the big funders are pulling out and all of those things. But largely, the funds that will be needed, or if at all we have the funds, is largely still homegrown. So while some of these big emitters are remitting some of these funds, I think I made mention of the Green Climate Fund that is available, yes, which also supports some of these initiatives. There's also the Infrastructure Resilient Climate Fund and a bunch of other funding as well that are there to support third world countries, or emerging economies to transition into the fields, into the clean energy. So funding comes from different sources. So from the Paris agreements, from those who are contributing and helping, essentially developing countries. And then one thing Nigeria as well can do particularly is to explore things that are called carbon markets, right? So carbon markets is just a cap and trade system where one setup you are able to trade emissions. So for cap and trade system, so let's take for example, we all have a cap that we are able to emit as an organization. So GFM, for example, you are able to, in your operations, you are only allowed to emit 10 tons of carbon. Yes, and then another organization has 10 tons of carbons to emit, right? So in the event where you exceed your target, and then the other organization does not exceed their own target, so what happens is, since they have not exceeded their target, they would sell their own credit. So since they have emitted less, so they would sell those ones to you. So you see, that's a way to get funding to help some of this transition. Or in a situation where, for voluntary carbon markets, where an organization exceeds their emission targets, they can do projects that can absorb the excess emissions they've done in developing countries. So it could be a solar farm, it could be afforestation, it could be anything essentially that would take out emissions, at least equivalent emissions in the environment.
All right, the phone lines are buzzing already: 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-77777. Hello, good morning. Apologies there, could not pick your call earlier enough. The phone lines are still open. Do call in and share your thoughts and ask your questions. Yes, the Lots of Voices from the Minds, brought to you by Ziva Community Initiative. And we're talking about energy transition this morning, what it means for me, for you, for Nigeria's economy, and also for artisanal and small-scale miners. If you want to be a part of the conversation, call us on our phone lines 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-77777. Well, let's take a detour and talk about government policies, because all of the things we talked about today and all of the things we're talking about today would make no sense if the policies are not there. I think over the course of the week, I think this week or last week, there was a retreat in Abia State where, the players, let me use the word, of the transition plan came together to talk about Nigeria's plans and what we're doing and how we're getting there and the things we are doing. I also saw something in Enugu where they said from coal to code, basically saying let us shift from just focusing on coal to also code. I've got two questions. First, what are some of the, not policies, because like you said, there's already a plan, so I imagine there are policies. What are the policies that are in place to ensure that this plan is feasible and we achieve it? And secondly, how functional, how effective are these plans these policies rather, that the governments have put in place?
Okay, so the policy is very important, I think. So one example I would always give is the Petroleum Industrial Act in the energy sector that has helped to streamline a lot of the bottlenecks or hurdles, if you like, that has impacted the growth of the sector in general. So there has been some policies by the government. I think there is the 2007 Mining and Mineral Act, and then the 2016 Mining Roadmaps, essentially. So they are largely there to try to streamline the processes, try to incorporate ethical mining practices. Because again, while we're transitioning, a lot there's also need for ESG concerns. There's also need for ethical mining. So yes, while you're mining, it has to be ethical. You're not supposed to have underage children on there using crude practices that causes harm and environmental harm and health hazards to people as well. But then largely where policies are coming is particularly is formalization and finance. So largely artisanal and small scale miners are largely informal. So there's no formality around it, and then so trying to register or try to have an organization is not necessarily there. So one of the government policies, some of these ones I've mentioned here, like the Climate Change Act, largely just tries to see how the whole mining sector can be streamlined, and how some of these policies can be set up so that artisanal and small scale miners, yes, can largely benefit from government grants, government loans, and all of these international climate funds that are available for mining sector. And then there's also the legal and regulatory reforms. So simplifying this licensing process is very important. So I think I was having a conversation with a friend, and she was saying lots of some people made an attempt, some of the artisanal small scale miners, I think at the Bank of Industry, to try to see how they can register and get access to funds, but then the lots of just regulatory hurdles and lots of bottlenecks, yes. So that is a huge impact. And then government can also do, at least through the Rural Electrification Agency, I think one thing policy can do is to help ramp up some of the resources from the Rural Electrification Agencies to help some of these artisanal and small scale miners, which we've established that are mostly in rural areas. Yeah. So that is where policy can come in, so that they can have access to some of these grants, formalizing them, and then they are also part of the sector. As I mentioned, artisanal and small scale miners contribute just about 0.02% of GDP, because lots of their operations are largely informal. So it's not even captured in GDP calculations. So that is where regulatory and government things can come.
All right, the phone lines are open. Let's pick this call. Hello, good morning. Good morning, sir. Your name and your location.
Thank you very much. My name is Solomon. I'm calling from Jukepot.
Please go on, sir.
You people are speaking very, very well, and I really enjoyed the conversation, though I catch you people late. But talking about mining, you see, everybody expects that miners should go and register before starting mining any place they want to go and do mining. But you see, and the still government is still warning about illegal mining. And there are some locations that you discover that even at the government property, mining is going on there. And when you go there, you make your research, you discover that the person who is doing that mining there maybe a when and state government and is doing mining, like especially like Lamingo Dam. You see, that dam, mining is going on there. And there are a lot of holes that they have dug. And people will say that those holes are close the bridge. And we that you are passing through those bridges, we begin to fear. We say, so maybe one day that this thing will collapse, because there are a lot of risks in mining. And when you see a collapsed structure, they told you that there has been a mining place before. So those who are in charge of giving lands to those who are doing mining, they should also think of all those things, because nobody would like to stay in his house and somebody has already do mine and reach his house. And then one day we just get his house being just go down to the ground. So it's not easy for us. So I wish that those who are in charge of giving land to miners, they should also think of all those things, so that life will be good for everybody.
Thank you so much for calling. Well, let's go on another commercial break. When we come back, we'll be picking your calls, answering your questions, and taking your contributions. This is still Voices from the Minds.
Every Friday on JFM, energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria takes center stage, explaining the role of ASM in energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria, with their objective to advocate and campaign for a full implementation of the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan and other global policies and treaties. Join Emeka Umesi and our seasoned resource persons on the role of artisanal and small-scale miners in energy transition and and climate change mitigation in Nigeria. Fridays 9 to 10 a.m. only on JE 101.9 FM. Powered by Ziva Community Initiative Advocates for a Sustainable Community with support from Africa Center for Energy Policy.
Yes, still on to Voices from the Minds, brought to you by Ziva Community Initiative. We're talking about energy transition plan, what it means, what we as people get to benefit from it. And Mr. Katlong Alex has been our guest today. Like I said before, you can be part of the conversation by calling into the studio lines on 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-77777. I'm sure many of you have questions already to ask us and contributions to make. Do call us and let us hear your thoughts, because together as a people and as a community we can grow and make money off mining. On a more serious note, Mr. Katlong, when you made mention also of the policies and some of the bottlenecks that these miners have to deal with. The caller called in and also made mention of how there has to be some, for want of a better word, carefulness. A lot of thought should put into giving mining license. From your observation, beyond just the transition, do you think miners in Jos that get certificate, first off, do they even get the certifications they need to mine? And secondly, at this process of certification, are they thoroughly done, or is it haphazard that people get certifications to mine in places they're not supposed to mine in?
Okay, so largely, as I've mentioned, artisanal and small-scale miners are largely informal. So I'm not sure of licenses and how they are issued here on the plateau, as we've seen here. But that's why there's also federal government thing, not necessarily a state thing. Yeah. So it's very important that there's an overhaul essentially of the whole mining industry in Nigeria, because we have minerals scattered all over the federation, right? So it's very important that we're able to have an overhaul of the entire sector, of the entire industries, streamline these processes, have registrations where they are able to register, have a corporation, have representatives, right? So this also gives artisanal miners collective bargaining power, because if they have an association, then they are recognized by the government, right? So they are able to advocate for themselves. They are also able to just ensure ethical practices are going on, and so having that formal sector overhaul of the industry is very, very important, because that way they are able to also tap in from these international funds like I've mentioned, the Green Climate Fund, the Infrastructure Climate Resilient Funds, and a bunch of other stuff there. So it's very important. Once we have that ramped up, then miners are able to go in and register and are being allocated sites. Just when things are done properly and done the right way, then you see there's going to be benefits for everyone, and then environmental impacts will be very, very minimal. And as I've mentioned, the mining sector itself, ASM as well, also contributes to global emissions, right? Huge emissions as well. So that is where renewables can come in. But however, most of these artisanal miners are low-income people, so they're not even able to afford some of these technologies. So formalizing it, then they're able to have access to government grants, international funds. They're also able to just come together to essentially just make more meaningful contributions. So having some of these renewable energies, sources of energies, can even help improve outputs, right? So because they're no longer using crude methods, but they're using more advanced methods to to mine these minerals, right? So very, very important that there's an overhaul of the system, regulates the sector accordingly, so that there are ethical practices essentially all across the industry.
Regulate your practices so that it's ethical all across the country. 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-77777. Let's hear your thoughts this morning. Let's hear your questions about energy transition. If you've understood or talked about today, or if you have some observations and you'd want to air them, do call into the show and air your observations. Economically, you've talked about how important energy is to Nigeria. You also made mention of the, what's the word now? For the lack of data for artisanal and small-scale miners. For energy sector in general in Nigeria, how important is it for the everyday person that we transition? What do we benefit as a man on the street, as a boy on the street, as a young graduate? What does a transition plan mean for me and mean for that woman?
Okay, so the energy transition has lots of benefits for the country, for Nigeria as a country and even its citizens. So first thing is there's a huge shift in the global, in the world energy system where we're trying to transition from oil and gas to renewables, right? So that presents Nigeria an opportunity to position itself as a key supplier of those critical rare earth minerals that is needed for the transition. So, and what that does is that opens up the economy for even more jobs, right? Because take solar for instance, when it comes to installation, managing, maintaining these infrastructures, that involves opening up jobs for people, right? So it's very important because first of all, it sets Nigeria the fear of stranded assets. When we say most of the people we give this oil and gas to are transitioning, so it's important that we also try to stay relevant so that we don't have stranded assets at the end of the day. We have lots of oil and gas and no one is taking them from us, right? Yeah. Then there's also the case where we are able to position ourselves in a way that we play very crucial and vital role in the transition by providing these rare earth minerals. So you see artisanal and small scale miners now, when it's formalized, because largely what they even pay for these minerals are peanuts to say the least. So when we're able to formalize it, when we're able to put everything together, then you see income of these artisanal scale miners who are roaming the streets as well increases because they have better livelihoods as well, which affects their economic outcomes and even their health outcomes as well.
All right, let's pick this call. Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. Good morning, sir. Your name and your location.
My name is Comrade Patrick Okora. I'm calling from the home of Blue Village and Average. Well, our congratulations go to our Pope Blue. It's the God making. Our prayer this morning is God to guide.
Unfortunately, the network is not going good this morning. Do try to call us back 09055666699 or 08121877777. We're talking energy transitions this morning. What it means for me, for you, and what does it mean for Nigeria's economy? Still sticking with economy, there's been a lot of conversations around industrialization and the process of Nigeria getting industrialized. Of course, we're not there yet. When we look at countries in the West, countries in Americas, and also in China, they've gone through that industrialization process where everything was working, right? For Nigeria, would the transition plan in any way affect our industrialization process? Or do you think that that process can be skipped and move on to something else?
Okay, so the energy transition, while it's very important, that's why gas, as I mentioned, is used as a transition fuel. So because the world is transitioning, we're not saying we are abandoning our oil and gas reserves, because again, largely about 40% of our population are not even connected to the grid, do not have access to electricity. And just good to put out there that energy is the life wire of any industry, of any civilization. So the first world countries, as we know them today, also had to rely on energy. Energy, you cannot even do anything without energy, right? It's very important. It's literally the life wire. It's the engine that keeps the economy running. Okay. So it's very important that we put that out there. But however, transition does not necessarily mean we are abandoning stuff, right? So it means we're just trying to move with the trend. So let me give you an example. Nigeria and largely Africa is dependent on car imports, right, from the West. Second-hand cars into the country. So in an event where we have become so reliant on oil and gas resources, and then EVs are ramping up very in a big way in the West, and then when they send down these vehicles for us, we cannot use them, right? We cannot use them. So that's why it's very important that we move. But however, the transition does not imply that we are going to stop everything.
So it means that, let's go short there, that it will not in any way affect our industrialization process.
No. If anything, it's also just going to, it has its own economic benefit. So because the thing with oil and gas in Nigeria is it's a blessing and a cost, right? So it has caused a lot of dependency and so we've not diversified as well. So what the transition does now, it gives us the opportunity to diversify, leveraging on the mining sector, the rare earth minerals that we have that can be part of the energy transition. So while we are using the fossil fuels we have on ground to take out our people out of energy poverty, we are also trying to move with the trend, right, with the global trends in the energy transition. So we're not necessarily, that's why gas, as I mentioned, is a low carbon emitter, that is, it burns cleaner than coal and oil and gas, right? So what that does is it helps us to transition at the same time, lifting our people out of poverty. That's why it's called a just energy transition. And it's very important that Africa in general try to think of what that means for them individually. I think that's why I mentioned the energy transition plan is a multi-pronged approach. It's a deeply researched thing. It was not just, okay, a thing you just pick up and just do. So it's looking at our current realities. We have lots of people who do not even have access to the grid, do not have access to electricity. So first of all is, while we're trying to transition, we're also trying to take people out of
poverty.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. Good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning.
Your name and your location, sir.
My name is Alexander Panchak. I'm calling from state locus around NYC.
Please go on, sir.
So my question is to Mr. Katlong Alex.
You're listening. You're listening. Go on.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Please go on. Please do try to call us back where we could hear you. Call us and ask your question. 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-77777. We're talking energy transition plan. What does it mean for us, and how do we as a people benefit from this? Let's go on our final commercial break, and when we come back, the phone lines will be open so you can call in and ask all your questions and make all your contributions. 5 minutes to the end of the show. Let's hear your thoughts. Let's hear your questions. What do you need to know about energy transition, and what have you understood so far? And what are some of the things you've observed when it comes to energy transition in the country?
Every Friday on JFM, energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria takes center stage, explaining the role of ASM in energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria, with their objective to advocate and campaign for a full implementation of the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan and other global policies and treaties. Join Emeka Umesi and our seasoned resource persons on the role of artisanal and small-scale miners in energy transition and climate change mitigation in Nigeria. Fridays 9 to 10 a.m. only on JE 101.9 FM. Powered by Ziva Community Initiative Advocate for a Sustainable Community, with support from Africa Center for Energy Policy.
You're still on to Voices from the Mines, brought to you by Ziva Community Initiative, and we're speaking today about energy transition. What does it mean? How does it affect us? And how can we benefit as a people? Mr. Katlong Alex has been our guest today, and he has been giving us valuable information on what this means for us. Phone lines are open to 090-5566-6699 or 081-218-77777. Well, for the artisanal and small-scale miners, if you have the word for them, a piece of advice for them, what would it be, especially as it concerns energy transition plan? Please hold on. Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Please go on.
Yes. Okay. My question is to Mr. Katlong Alex.
Please go on. Go on.
Yes. So, does the AEC or the Nigerian government have any plan in place to at least educate these local miners of what proper mining practices are and maybe its effect on the environment?
All right, then. Thank you so much for calling. We had this question: is there a plan to educate people? Like you mentioned, when you talk about ethical mining, I'm sure, okay, let me not say I'm sure, I assume that many of these miners don't even understand what ethical mining is. Is there an education plan for them?
Absolutely. So that is why we say, when I mentioned that the energy transition plan does not even include mining, mining is not a pillar of the energy transition plan, then there is a need for it to be incorporated as well, right? So that there is good sensitization. I think as part of the work that Ziva Care Initiative does is to enlighten these artisanal miners about their rights, about the what, just for them to even understand what it is they are doing. So large number of these artisanal and small scale miners do not even know the minerals that they mine. They undersell these things. They sell them for peanuts, literally. So there is need for an overhaul of the system entirely, so that there is good education and awareness to these people, so that they understand it, what it does, and then they also get to have the benefits, or to enjoy the benefits of what they do. Because like I mentioned, it's not just enough to just go and mine. There are environmental impacts, there are health impacts. Some of the things they are exposed to on the mines cause detrimental health issues to them in the long run, right? So it's important to have an overhaul of the entire mining system and try to integrate it into the energy transition plan, because again, mining is also part of the hard-to-abate sectors. So it's very important that it is being formalized, properly formalized. So when you're able to formalize, then you're able to train these people, you're able to educate these people, you're also able to integrate ethical practices and standards into them, and then you're able to regulate them. So I think that way it works out for everyone.
Works out for everyone. 2 more minutes till the end of the show. Do call in and ask your questions. 09055666699 or 081218777.